Hello and welcome to the Public Works Podcast, the show where we highlight the people who keep our cities running, our communities connected, and our public spaces thriving. I'm your host, Shane Silsby, and our goal is to facilitate discussions with leaders who are shaping the future of public service and infrastructure, including parks, across the nation. Today, we're focused on the Pacific Northwest, and I'm excited to talk with someone that truly embodies the spirit of public service, Anthony Diaz, or AP as we'll call him today. And he is the Superintendent of Parks and Recreation for the City of Seattle. AP brings a remarkable blend of leadership experience and community passion to the table. Before joining Seattle, he spent years with the City of Los Angeles, also in their Department of Recreation and Parks, helping guide one of the nation's largest urban park systems through major transformation, from expanding green spaces to hosting world-class public events that brought Angelinos together. Beyond his day job, AP is also known for his deep commitment to volunteerism and teaching, proving that public service doesn't stop at the office door. In this conversation, we'll talk about leadership lessons learned from managing park facilities in two of America's most dynamic cities, how community partnerships can strengthen local government, and what the future may hold for recreational infrastructure and public events in Seattle. Finally, we'll wrap up with a few rapid-fire questions about his favorite park, event, and scenic spot in the Emerald City. So grab your coffee, maybe a Starbucks to align with the Seattle theme, and enjoy this conversation with AP Diaz right here on the Public Works Podcast. I hope you enjoy this episode. All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Public Works Podcast. I'm here with a very special guest, AP Diaz, who's up in the city of Seattle now, although it used to be down in Southern California where I'm at. So we're excited to have him today. AP, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Shane. I'm really excited to be with you and share a couple of minutes today talking about some great things going on in public spaces.
Oh, that's awesome. And now your name's Anthony, but I've been directed. We can call you AP just for the listeners, right? That's okay.
That's okay. Perfectly fine.
Okay, great. Appreciate that. So for those that don't know your story, which is very interesting, would you mind sharing a little bit about your background and kind of what led you to public service and then to transition?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a native Angelino, born and raised in LA. I went to school back east for college at Georgetown and then returned to LA and went to law school at Loyola in Los Angeles and had an amazing career at the city attorney's office in LA for many years and worked in a variety of situations, everything from criminal law to general counsel, municipal contract law. And for several years, I was serving as the general counsel for a couple of different city departments, the city council and recreation and parks. And in about 2016, I was asked to come in-house and help manage and run one of the largest LA city departments, and really fell in love with the work of recreation and parks and the impacts that they are making all around cities. And I just fell in love with the profession and was doing that very well. At the end of the Garcetti administration, I got a call from some folks in Seattle who were looking to fill some key spots for their then new mayor, Mayor Bruce Harrell. And so I had a couple of great conversations with him, really resonated with his vision and his heart for public service. Before I knew it, I was coming up to the Pacific Northwest. And if you had asked me if I would have ever left Los Angeles, I would have said probably not.
Yeah, that's an interesting shift. Obviously, kind of big city to big city, not maybe a huge jump, but it's completely different region, completely different style, right? LA, second largest city in the country, largest county in the country. So that's interesting. So we're going to dive into that a bit more. You served in the primary leadership roles in two of the largest cities in the country, Seattle being the 18th largest roughly right now, if I have that right.
Fourth fastest growing city in America as well.
Fourth fastest growing. And then you and I also talked about one of the only cities in the country, maybe 10, that added 100,000 between the last census. So it's obviously jumping up. And I think what we'll talk about is urban areas expand and people come in and whatever. Sometimes parks aren't thought about in the beginning, but then you have all those people there and then it's like, hey, where's our parks? Right.
Right.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about what drew you to the Pacific Northwest, which is the mayor reached out and obviously you had a great career. But How did that shift happen? You mentioned that it did happen from being attorney to being basically a department head. How does that happen? You have almost a full career as an attorney, right? People would just love to do that and just be in the law, but then you shift over to run a department. How did that kind of transition?
It's definitely a non-traditional approach in the city world of municipal government. And so it really was an opportunity where I had to ask myself, do I want to try something new? Do I want to learn a new field and a set of skills and tasks that I hadn't previously encountered as a lawyer? It was worth it. I love to continue to grow and expand and learn new things. I'll tell you a funny story about that, though. I remember one of my first as a department head, and we had to have a meeting with the city attorneys about a case that was being litigated. We got together, and I knew some of these people from before that I had practiced with, but I was in my new role, and the attorney sort of explained where we were. We were at a crossroads. We had a couple of options that could be pursued, and they basically ended by saying, we would love to hear from you. What would you like us to do? Do you have any thoughts on where you would like us to go to make a decision? And I kind of just sat back and nodded and was looking around the room at everybody like, yeah, that's what we want to hear. Where's your decision? And all these eyes are looking at me because I was no longer the attorney. I was actually the client. For the first time in my life in professional practice, I was the client. And so it was a really different mindset shift where I said, I have to make these decisions now. So it was very interesting.
For sure. Yeah, you changed roles, but other people might not have changed their roles. So they're trying to figure that out. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And then potentially you couldn't help yourself maybe thinking like, well, this is maybe what I would have done as the attorney, and trying to stay in your lane a little bit. Obviously, you have great expertise. I'm sure they would love to hear from you, but that's got to be an interesting kind of push-pull there.
Yeah, it is. But, it's been tremendously valuable. I think that with my background and experience, I'm now able to thwart off issues earlier, help guide departments so that I know the potential risk and where we might be. And I think it's certainly a benefit to the departments. And I think it's also a benefit to the city attorney's office because they've got an ally, they've got someone who understands their work. And so helping on the front end to keep them informed and them close to the vest is always a more productive and successful working relationship.
Sure. And I know as a department head, you were a department head, you're negotiating all the time on different things. So as an attorney, you obviously bring that skill over. And then also as a department head, you're usually reviewing contracts or signing off things of authority. And so what I'll call the paperwork side, which goes through the attorneys, you're obviously sped up. You were ahead of the game for that. So I think that's great. When we think of Seattle, a little bit different than obviously than Los Angeles, but it appears to me it has a strong reputation for equity, sustainability, community engagement, thought about maybe as a small town, even though it's getting to be a big city. So how do you kind of embrace that as you've joined that team and or supplemented those thoughts?
It's exciting. I often describe Seattle as being a big, small city because it's big in so many ways. We talked about the population growth. There's 5 of our nation's biggest headquarters here, whether that's Boeing or Starbucks, Microsoft, amazing universities, top tier symphonies and companies and all kinds of industry. But it is a city of water, surrounded by water, which makes it special and unique. But in some ways, it can be a bit insular and it can be a bit space as a commodity and it's precious. All of those factors together are an interesting mix. But what I was attracted to most is the way the city is intentionally growing and thinking about the role of public spaces, parks, transformational projects, that those are vital infrastructure to support a health and wellness-minded city and to make the city more attractive. They don't need to do those things because it's actually quite beautiful here. Nature has done that for us, but incorporating those things into civic planning, that's the special jam. That's the unique thing that really attracted me to this area.
Interesting, which leads me into my next question, really. So you set it up perfectly. You've led teams that manage thousands of acres of public spaces and hundreds of community programs, both in LA and in Seattle. How do you approach that from a decision-making standpoint where you've got maybe public needs or demands where everybody wants a park in their neighborhood and they want it to be the best park, but you got to balance that with the budget and then with long-term vision, right? Is that the best place for it? Do we have a park desert in another area? So how do you manage all those things? Public interest, the budget, the long-term vision, maybe to accommodate growth. How do you work on that?
Sure. I think at the outset, you establish a baseline, and I think we have a new baseline, and we learned this from the pandemic. I often say that now more than ever, it's the time to amplify the narrative that parks are essential infrastructure to the health and wellness of a city. When the entire world was shut down during the pandemic, it didn't matter if you lived in Seattle, Sydney, Rome, Auckland. The only place that we could go during these sheltered years were our public parks, our open spaces. They're just as important as bridges and highways. And when you lead on that narrative, you begin to garner that sort of respect and focus, ensuring that the council, that the mayor are, providing good budgets and allowing you as a department to create these spaces from recreational to open to art to public gathering spaces, places where people come together. It makes that journey much more significant. For many years, park agencies were always sort of competing against the sort of big infrastructure projects. But I think now people are realizing that nature-based solutions, integrated green space into the city, it's really important.
For sure. Yeah. In Seattle, you have a lot of green to start with. So that's interesting. But in LA, when you were there, and I know we're going to jump back and forth a little bit between regions, but during your tenure there, you played a key role, obviously, in trying to help with those green spaces. You talked about expanding those, revitalizing parks. Which one of those projects or initiatives are you most proud of from your time at City of LA?
Well, it's interesting. We did so many amazing things in Los Angeles. I think of two things at sort of the opposite ends. One was a transformative restoration and redevelopment of one of LA's most iconic spaces, the Greek Theater, which is the heart of Griffith Park and one of the premier outdoor concert venues in the nation. I was really fortunate to work on getting that back into city hands. It had been out in private contract for 44 years. It needed a lot of attention and love, and it's such a focal point and identity spot for Los Angeles. I spent many years really working on that project and transforming this venue into a further world-class, award-winning, amazing place to see a show, and made some intentional investments that are going to last for years. That was an example of something you're providing for the public in a unique way. Concerts and plays and graduations and all the things that happen there are forms of recreation that are important, and they contribute and add identity to Los Angeles. During the pandemic, we stood up thousands of ways to serve people, whether it was through vaccine clinics, housing shelters for the unsheltered, converting our recreation centers into 7-day-a-week, 24-hour shower centers and spaces. Then we had a partnership with Camping World and the state of California, where we received and stood up hundreds of trailers where we would isolate and shelter people that didn't have places to go when they contracted COVID. It just shows you the power of parks and how those can really serve as integral parts. When we were doing the unsheltered program and standing up these facilities, we even looked back to cases that went back to the 1940s, and the last time Griffith Park and some park areas had been used for a similar situation, it was to house soldiers coming back from World War II. So again, parks standing up at key points in history are really important. I think we'll be remembered for that, and I'm really proud of the work that I was able to do with a bevy of really talented park and rec professionals.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know about that history of what was happening at Griffith Park there, the private and then the publics. Thanks for sharing that. You mentioned some of the people, we had the pandemic elements, then we have the normal or new normal. And LA is very diverse and immense city, second largest in the country, and 88 cities, right? So how did that shape your understanding, or anything else you want to add about your understanding of how parks and public spaces can bring people together? You obviously mentioned how that was vital during the pandemic, even troops during the military campaigns. Anything else about your understanding of that took away from your time in LA?
Sure. In a city of 4 million people, surrounded by a county, you talked about those 88 cities of some 10 to 12 million people, the demand for space is challenging. And LA developed itself around a culture of cars and freeways. A lot of what we think about Los Angeles is freeways. The opening scene to La La Land is a bunch of people dancing on the 110 freeway. There's this cultural identity that we associate with concrete and freeways. They're part of the fabric of our system and how we get around. And of course, now we're playing catch up in LA with building out more metro and different modes of transportation, which is really important. But in that whole development that spans back decades, what developed then was a series of parks that aren't always connected. And so you have a lot of parks, but they tend to be disconnected. So access becomes hard, ensuring that equity and they're being taken care of and maintained in similar fashions between different parts of the city. LA is also a city of extreme high wealth, middle class, and then people on the lower economic spectrum. How you maintain and do that is really important. And there was a time in Los Angeles when there were plans that were drawn up for a more connective park system with a famous firm called the Olmsted Brothers, who have designed some of the most iconic parks in the United States and around the world. Unfortunately, the city leaders back in those early 1920s abandoned those for the sort of highway projects. So now we're paying catch up in LA. And then we moved to Seattle, and I was just so blessed and blown away that the city of Seattle also commissioned the Olmsted firm to draw up designs for a connected city of parks and boulevards. Seattle implemented a lot of the Olmsted vision, and we have this now legacy of amazing connective parks and beautiful necklaces and everything like that. So it's really fantastic.
Yeah, for sure. That's interesting. Seeing LA trying to use what they have and enhance it, maybe the rivers or the beaches, but trying to add a little bit of infrastructure to connect it so people can get to other areas that might have more recreation opportunities. So trying to do what you can after it's built, always more difficult, but I know there's a lot of efforts there. You mentioned all of those complexities in LA and some of that translating to Seattle, but are there any other lessons you took from your time in LA that have proved to be valuable when you're working in Seattle's unique urban environmental landscape, and obviously you moving to a new region, new city? So any other lessons there?
I think the biggest lesson correlating our similar path is finding the individuals and people who really love parks, who can be park advocates. We have so many great people in both cities. But I think the thing that I learned from Los Angeles is the power of public-private partnerships. Mm-hmm. That's something the city really leaned into under the Garcetti administration and in the lead up to the Olympics, the proliferation and return of many of our sports teams. Those kinds of things are really important and they're valuable. And when you can connect parks, recreation, kids, open space, the environment with those companies, entities, organizations, nonprofits, for-profits that have a passion, they want to give and they want to be good corporate citizens. And so if you lean into them and help them, ask them to help you develop the city and ask them to help you do things that the government cannot do on its own, that's when the city shines best. And unfortunately, cities in the past sometimes shy away from that and set up many barriers. What I learned through my work with the Olympics too, is that there really is a bevy of people that want to do good and can do more and enhance what you are able to provide. I welcome that, and I took that spirit with me up to Seattle, and we're doing some great things up here.
Yeah, that's interesting. On the P3 side, you have some of those super companies, if you will, with some super wealthy. Obviously, you have it in LA, but you have a lot more people, a lot more needs. What do you think was holding some folks back? Maybe on the P3 side, was it just loss of control or concern that there'd be more of a private slant versus just using straight public tax dollars? What do you think might be holding people back from embracing that P3 strategy?
I think it's a combination of all of those things. And it's interesting that you mentioned losing control, because I think that's a really strong thing that people wrestle with until you realize that as a public agency, you have powerful real estate. You have the ability to set the parameters. You have the ability to control how the relationship is going to work. When you recognize and realize that you're in the position of strength and power, it's liberating and free, because then you can really negotiate and work. And yes, you need to meet the needs of both people. There are few, but there are people who just want to give money and don't want their name and never want to hear about a project again. But a lot of the people that want to contribute in today's world, they want to know where their dollars are going. They want to see some ROI, and they want to be able to know that they can do that. So I think bringing in a mix of people also that have an ability to negotiate, that understand the private world, and mixing that into government is important. Certainly no knock on people that work in the municipal field. I've worked there for the majority, almost the entire time in my professional service. But I think you need to have a good mix of people so that you're not passing or missing opportunities just simply out of fear or inability to negotiate or to understand how to shape the parameters of an agreement that could be successful for everyone.
Interesting. It sounds like your advice might be go ahead and try it out. You can always say no, but if it works, then you can have that private investment to get your project moving forward, which, let's be honest, no agency has a bunch of extra money. So if you're trying to do something new, it might be an avenue. So that's an interesting point. Just give it a try. You can always say no, right?
Give it a try. And that's the motto that I implement with my staff here is let's fail forward. Let's try new things. We can always say, this isn't working. We're going to pull it back. There's ways to structure that. But if you don't try new things, you limit yourself. This old adage still exists in many government agencies today. It's that, well, we've been doing this for 20 years. We've been doing this for 30 years. Sometimes you ask people, well, why are you doing that? And sometimes they don't know the answer. The answer is, well, we've just been doing it for 20 or 30 years. There's no growth there. Agencies, people, just look at the fabric of society. Things change, things develop, things grow. Being an agency that can adapt and lean into that, far more positive things that will come from that, as opposed to just sort of saying, we're not going to do that. We don't know how to do that. We're fearful of that. And we're not doing it because this is how we've always done it. That's not good government. That's not service.
Yeah, fear of change. And it's a hard conversation when you're working with maybe employees that have been doing something for 15 years, but they could have been doing it a different way or a more effective way, but they just didn't know, right? So that's where leadership comes in to provide those. I liked what you said about kind of failing forward, because over my 20 years in public service, I tried to get people, and I learned, and then tried to get people to understand. In government, there's so many checks and balances. You have a lot of opportunities to course correct. If you launch and then there's a barrier, obstacle, or a challenge, you can always shift a little bit. Where you start and where you end don't have to be the same, but you never get to the end if you don't start.
Right.
I like your thoughts there. So you're open-minded, your brain deals with a lot of things every day. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that because you're also volunteering and you're doing educational things. Some of it may be intertwines with your job, but some of it is completely outside of that. Can you tell us about some of your efforts and educational initiatives and what drives you to that commitment outside of your day job? I don't want to get them wrong, but we know you're working with the World Urban Parks Association and the National Recreation and Parks Association, and then on your academic side. So you want to talk about that a little bit? And I don't know when you sleep, AP, but you got a lot going on.
Thank you, Shane. Yeah, I know. Sleep is precious, and I do have a lot going on. And I think working in the world of parks, so I always say my job as a city leader, as a park leader, is to understand and know the various love languages of people within town. And what I mean by that is that sometimes I'll spend my morning. Yesterday was a variety of things. It was a very busy day. In the afternoon, we're hosting this thing called the One Ocean Week in Seattle. So I had to whip over to a panel and do some introductions and welcome this panel that we're talking about marine sea life and seagrass and bull kelp and all of these marine things. And we have 19 coastal parks. And we have people that work in those ecosystems. So here I am doing this introduction and staring at a room of people that, quite honestly, their love language was all of that stuff, seagrass, marine life, like they just soak that in. And that's their love language. Their love language isn't golf. Their love language isn't youth recreational sport development. And then in the afternoon, I was with a group of staff members who are plotting out our activation in parks and concert series and ways that we show up for the public. That's their love language, right? In the afternoon, I'll be out at the Arboretum and opening up new bike trails and doing some environmental work with our team on Saturday. And their love language is the earth, trees, nature. And so when you understand that, then you become, I love to learn and to know a little bit about all of these things because that's how I connect with people. Connecting with people is really important. I think that's probably one of my love languages. I will say that my education that I had at both Georgetown and Loyola, this Jesuit philosophy of service is really important. And I think that's some of my core. To your point, I enjoy working and giving of my time. You can give your time in a variety of ways, right? Time, talent, or treasure. But I think giving my time is important to causes. And then recently I've started teaching law to international law students at Seattle University. I've just become a member of the Washington State Bar, in addition to being a member of the California State Bar. And that's just so wonderful because I spend an evening a week with these international law students who are just young and bright-eyed. We're talking about current political affairs and constitutional issues. It's exciting to be able to help them learn and grow. So I really enjoy that work. I enjoy being busy and productive and talking about parks, quite honestly.
That's great. I was going to follow up on that with your efforts, volunteerism, community partnership, giving back academically. How do you see that helping people engage more to enhance the reach of public infrastructure or your parks programs?
I think because I have taken time to get to know people, build relationships. We talked about a variety of approaches to government service, right? There's doing the work, there's being open to public-private partnerships, there's, connecting with people. All of those little pieces are really important if you want to move the dial and do things, because everybody's going to be part of a project for a different reason. And if you can identify those reasons and then somehow build some consensus and get people focused on a similar path, then your results are likely to be more productive. So in the development of a civic space or a new park, you have to recognize, and oftentimes people just laser in and focus on their own issues. And staff do that too. They're reticent to adapt or to change things because they're approaching it only from their viewpoint. Public projects are difficult because it involves a lot of community engagement. It involves some consensus. It involves some coalition of funding and getting people together to make something happen. At some point, you have to give. At some points, you have to pull. My ability to work in different spaces, understand different needs, that helps build consensus. I think that's some value and skill that I bring to my job, and I really enjoy that, even the pulling times as well as the pausing and pushing times as well.
That's a great lesson or guidance you offer, that if you can build a constituency or build empathy for the initiative, your job's probably going to be a little bit easier to try to deliver that public infrastructure, a park, or a program if people are embracing around it.
It's interesting too, because at some point you have to realize it's great if you can there's a few projects where you'll get 90% consensus or just an overwhelmingly, I'm all in. But in public work, you have to realize that sometimes 51%, that's consensus. I always tell my staff too, I remind people, the provision of public spaces is really difficult. You will never please all of the people all of the time. There will be someone or some person or group who feels disenfranchised, or the project's not going the way they would like it to go. If you try to build that, you can take years. And that's why I think people get frustrated with government. We've been working on this project for 10 years, 15 years. At some point, you need to make a decision and say, we're going to go for it. I think that's an important part of leadership, and making people feel comfortable that it's okay to go forward. Sometimes people are just waiting for that. Let's do it.
Right. One of the things I used to try to implement with team meetings that we had and things like that, look, if you're going to get blamed either way in public service, you might as well get something done, right? Check that box, get it off the board, improve your community if you're going to get blamed. If not, you're going to get blamed for not doing something. Do your best, make defensible decisions, move it forward. You have good context in that and a good thought process. What advice would you give to other employees in public service who might want to engage more deeply with their communities beyond their professional areas, but maybe have never done that before?
Yeah, some of the attractive qualities of working in the public sector is there tends to be a value on quality of life. And we're seeing this more, thankfully, in the workplace. Health and wellness is important. In my profession, I can't have a portfolio where I'm signaling and conveying the attributes of public health and asking people to get into nature and to find ways to relax and to improve your mental well-being, if I'm not affording that same ability and grace to the people that I work with, I want employees to be healthy, to feel connected to affinity groups, to get into nature, to take time to develop, and also to do things outside of work that whatever their passion is, whatever their love language is, do that. It makes for a better employee. It makes for a better colleague. And then you can approach your work with some more renewed, refreshed interests. So our work is busy and we work a lot, but I think it's also important to take time to walk the talk. I want to make sure that our staff is doing that as much as possible.
That's great. We're talking about the people, the feelings and the energy and all of that, with potentially the outcome to be the public infrastructure, the park or community event. I wanted to talk a little bit about the power of that infrastructure, those events, and that parks often serve as a city's cultural heartbeat and how tourists experience urban areas. I know whenever I go to Seattle, I'm spending most of my time in a public space that has potentially a recreational element or a park element to just enjoy what the city has to offer, or the sound or the lake. What role do you think, that's kind of the infrastructure, but what role do you think large community events can play in shaping that civic identity?
I think they're super important. We are people that desire to do life together. And we had that taken away from us in 2020 and 2021, and parts of 2022. The ability to get out and be amongst people. People crave community. And it's in a variety of forms. I mean, there are people who say, I don't enjoy community, or I don't like large crowds. And that's true. But I think people enjoy public spaces. You can even find joy walking around a mall, or being in a market, or being at Pike Place Market where there's food and flowers, just to see life going on. We are people who are doing life together. And so for the times that we want to come together, a festival, a music event, a community market, an art fair, farmers market, providing those opportunities for people to do that. And those are usually done in public spaces, recognizing that and then being able to intentionally plan that. So last night, our community team does park activations. They just won a Civic award because we have this amazing programs where we hire and fund buskers to come and play music and read poetry and do things in public spaces that sometimes draw an audience. And sometimes it's just nice to have some positive activation as you're walking through a space. So I think it is important. And I often say too, parks serve as people's backyards and their front yards. And some of the most important celebrations in life occur in a public park. People have birthday parties. They have family reunions. So they're catching up with people they haven't seen in years. So they meet at the park. They're celebrating their child's birthday at the park. People are getting engaged at the park. And then I always tell people too, if you're in a long-term relationship and all of a sudden someone says, can we meet at the park this afternoon? That could be a sign of some heartbreak to come, but it's an example of the role that parks play in people's lives. And not everybody is fortunate to have a big backyard. Their public parks become their places that they do life. I think if you keep that in mind, that people are going to require and rely on parks every single day, then you're more motivated to make sure that you're doing things and delivering high quality, service oriented parks that have the things that people want to do. So you've got to listen and understand what people need so that you can adapt to the times and maybe not do things the way you've done them traditionally, because there are new needs and new communities that are coming in that have different ways they want to use our parks or our public spaces.
Sure. And you talked about moving from maybe a digital or non-connection to a physical in-person or real world connection. And you also talked about adaptability, which I wanted to ask you about. How is Seattle approaching the intersection of providing these recreational areas with sustainability, and particularly as cities and coastal cities face climate impacts or coastal resilience issues? That's a question, but I know I've been watching this waterfront park develop as I've been to Seattle over the last few years. So maybe you want to intertwine kind of that transformational project as well.
Sure. I can tell you that Seattle really has a great understanding of what's going on in our climate space and have some great companies, we have civic initiatives, we have a state that's aligned with our local representatives and our cities. Climate action is really important, adaptation and resiliency and how we live in this world. And I think we all feel as Washingtonians a certain commitment to the land because it is so abundant in natural beauty, and the resources of the land are so important and have been since time immemorial. That sense of duty as a caretaker, as a steward to the area we live in, it's evident in the policies. Our last governor, Jay Inslee, was known as a climate champion. Today, we talk about the positive attributes we're trying to do to keep our environment healthy. I mentioned we do things along the coast. In Parks and Recreation here in Seattle, I'm both a steward and caretaker for our parkland, but also our seascapes. And that's really interesting. It was a new world that I had to learn about: the ocean, the salmon runs, the lakes, freshwater versus seawater, and not only in the marine environment and in ecology and the environment, but also recreational uses and needs of boaters and swimmers and beach users. So all of those intersections of how we use this land is really important. Seattle, we've got a couple of awards that we're really proud about. We've just been consistently ranked among the 10 top park agencies in the entire United States by the Trust for Public Land. We've been ranked 6th, we've been ranked 8th, and we're really proud of that. And then we've recently been recognized by the United Nations as the only US city with a designation of a role model city for work we're doing for urban forest restoration within our city and how we're taking care of our trees. So people love the environment. I've really leaned into this space and have learned so much since I've been here about ways that we can show up. The mayor just launched, cities usually have like a 5-year climate action plan, and Seattle's is now on the brink of starting our new 5-year action plan. The mayor just announced and asked us to all work on that. But this is the first time ever that Parks has been invited to the table to be part of that. Traditionally, climate action plans focus on carbon emissions and goals around transportation and fleets and buildings. And we are certainly doing that. Our fleet is almost all electric. We're building new buildings with net zero carbon, less carbon footprint mandates. But we are also showing up because we are going to now start implementing what we call nature-based solutions into our work in Seattle to help adapt to climate change and to be a positive way that we can mitigate some of those negative effects. You mentioned the Waterfront Park, which is our newest, biggest, wonderful transformational project in Seattle. We buried a double-decker viaduct, highway, freeway, bored a tunnel underground, made this new amazing underground tunnel, and then reopened the waterfront. But in developing that, in all of the park spaces and the hardscapes and the things for bikers and in the plantings, we also were able to build a seawall, attract marine life back to the area. Seattle is a city that is of water, and that plays a very important role in who we are.
Yeah, that's great. It's very transformational. We were talking about that a little bit. You mentioned some of the elements from a government standpoint and a community standpoint to look forward to the future, the 5-year plans, more sustainability, looking at nature-based solutions. But you're going to need people to do that. What advice would you give to the next generation of leaders who want to either enter public service in general or enter into the parks field?
I love that. Yes, we're going to need people, not only professional people in the organization, but also community members. Remember, I was talking about those love languages, right? So people have love languages and they want to use things. But what I love about Seattle too is people have a heart for service as well and for giving back. We're just celebrating the 20th anniversary of what we call GSP, or the Green Seattle Partnership. And what that is, it's a cadre of 1,000 volunteers throughout the city of Seattle who volunteer to be forest stewards or help us maintain our natural landscape. They do actual touch the earth. They repair our trails. They help us plant. They help us mulch. They help us track our trees. They help us really take care of our natural areas. And we could not do the work that we do without our volunteer workforce. That's another thing that agencies are sometimes afraid of. In Los Angeles, I remember it was very challenging, and I tried to bring a program where we could implement something just what I'm talking about. And there were so many roadblocks and barriers to it. And then I came to Seattle, and they were doing exactly what I wanted to do, getting people from an early age, and we have programs with schools and kids and nature guides, getting them interested and aware of the environment. That ensures that you have a next generation who's going to love and want to take care of the land, and maybe do it in a volunteer way, or maybe they'll help support it philanthropically, but also reaching into the pipeline to develop the next generation of leaders. And I was just talking last night with a friend, a colleague at the utility department, and we were saying the importance of parks does so much. When I transitioned from being a lawyer to a park department head, I had to change my little shtick that we do at cocktail parties, right? Everybody asks, what do you do? And I had mine, I'm a lawyer and blah, 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 done this, buys, do contracts, etc. And so I thought, wow, I have to come up with a new shtick. So first time I was in my new role, and someone invariably said, hey, what do you do? I said, oh, I help manage and run the LA City Parks Department and etc. Someone looked at me and they said, so you build playgrounds? And I said, well, that's one thing we do. And we're very proud of that, by the way. I said, and we also do, about a minute or two later, after I'd mentioned, we do environmental issues, land use, environmental mitigation. We manage golf courses, an aquarium. We take care of beaches. We provide aquatics. And the litany, the variety of what you do in this work is really vast and complex. So I say all that to say, Shane, that in my current role, I have staff who are architects, engineers, landscape architects, sophisticated accountants, contract negotiators. We have an ecologist, we have a forester, we have an arborist, we have horticulturalists, we have people that are all part of this ecosystem. There are so many careers, but I think it's knowledge and awareness and exposure for our young people. We're doing internship programs. We have a program called Seattle Mentors. We're exposing kids to a variety of careers, but I want that next generation of kids to know that they can have a place in public service and do a variety of things, from being a lifeguard to maybe being a ecologist or a marine biologist. So there's so much in this space. It's really exciting.
Yeah, that's interesting. As you were going through all those, I was just thinking that you're doing a great job of trying to establish purpose. And that's one of the things I think as public agencies we can offer, maybe as a counter to the private sector, another element. Nothing wrong with either one, but we need people in both fields. And as pay is not going to keep up between public and private sector, as government agencies, especially local agencies of no fault of their own, get criticized or lose credibility because of what happens outside of their sphere. I think if we can bring back, just continue to focus on that purpose, like you're talking about, then you can find somebody that's interested in that or not. And if they're interested, get them in, train them up, do the best we can. So I think what you're doing covers on a lot of different fronts. You're doing it academically, you're doing it in a volunteer fashion, you're doing it for the city with your leadership. So appreciate your efforts on that.
Thank you.
We want to be careful of your schedule because you have so much going on. I wanted to see if I could hit you with a couple of quick hitters. We don't have to overthink these. This is just try to get some feeling, especially for people that might not live in the parks world all the time, to get your expertise on this and thoughts. So a couple of these real quick. Your favorite park anywhere in the world, what would your favorite park be?
That's a good question. I would say I really love a park right here in Seattle called Lincoln Park. I think it's just one of the most idyllic, beautiful parks. It's on the water, but it's got majestic forested and old growth trees. It's got a cool rocky beach, and it's got an infinity saltwater pool. It's just a fantastic, lovely spot right on the Salish Sea. So that's pretty idyllic. I would think Lincoln Park in Seattle is pretty amazing.
That's great, but you're not going to give anybody directions to get there. You're going to keep that for yourself. Sounds like.
Exactly. It's terrible. Don't go there.
So that's a bit on the infrastructure side. On the activity side, do you have a favorite community event or festival you've been part of or continue to be part of in your career?
Yeah, I'm thinking about, we do these downtown activations where for the past 2 summers, we've actually closed down city streets right under the monorail and near the Space Needle, where we bring sports to the streets. A lot of cities, they'll, close their streets and do bicycle events and things like that. And we do some of that, but we've done pickleball, we've done basketball, we've done soccer and futsal. We're going to be doing some more of that before the World Cup is coming next summer to Seattle. I really love that because it's people in the heart of the city, and it's exciting. It's like if you close down a freeway, you would never be walking in these areas. And here you are, kids are playing basketball right under the Space Needle. It's pretty magical. People really love that. And I always enjoy those events in the summer because we're using the city in a non-traditional way.
Hmm. I know last time I was there, maybe a month ago, I saw that one of the blocks, maybe one block east of Pike's Place Market, was closed down, and there was a lot of activity there. There were these big like board game type things. People were playing music. People were eating from restaurants. They brought it out into there. I thought that was interesting, that it was noticeable to me, like, oh, there's something happening here. And I know it's not easy to close down those streets. Everybody has a different opinion, but kudos for you on trying to take some risks or just see what happens. So that's great. You never know till you do it in some cases, like you said before.
Right.
You mentioned the park, but do you have another spot that you think is the most scenic in Seattle?
There's a couple of amazing spots. Last night I was in West Seattle and getting a view of the city that you don't traditionally see. It was a nighttime and it was just exquisite. You could see the ferries lit up at night, and you could see the Space Needle and our wonderful waterfront and the buildings. I really love that. I think there's Cary Viewpoint, where you can see the city from a park on the hill, and you can see Mount Rainier when it's out. And that's just jaw-dropping. Anytime Mount Rainier is out, it literally stops you in your tracks because it's so massive and it frames the city, and it's just so beautiful. But I think one little area is a park called Myrtle Edwards, which is along the water and has these really cool little beaches. What I love about that is two things. One, if you're standing and you're facing west, you see the amazing Olympic Mountains, where there is actually a rainforest in the middle of those mountains and a national public park. And you see the Salish Sea and you see islands, and it's absolutely beautiful. All nature when you're facing west. All you do is you turn around and then you can see the backdrop of the city because it's that close to the city. And you realize that this is a true city in nature. And I think that's an idyllic spot.
Interesting. So you get the contrast there just by turning around. Either way, that's cool. I have
Yeah.
to look for that next time I'm there. Do you have a memory maybe from your childhood? You ended up in law, but then you shifted over to parks. Was there some experience that stuck with you from a park or an event that you thought, oh, now looking back, maybe that's something that made me interested in this field?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I think back sometimes about early childhood park memories, I remember going to, and I think it was a YMCA day camp that I went to in the summer from time to time. It was in this natural area called Will Rogers Park. I was a kid that grew up in an apartment in the city, and I really loved that experience. And much to my mother's chagrin, I would collect these acorns, these white acorns that I thought smelled great. And then I would stuff them in my pockets, and she would find them in the wash all the time. So then we would have clean acorns littered around my room. But those times in nature, I think, were really important. And I didn't realize that until I was in law school. And when I was studying for the bar, you have a very regimented schedule. And I found some trails near where I was living then. And so I would take time every afternoon and go into the trails. And it kind of would remind me of when I was a kid in this Will Rogers State Park. And so I think those two things. One, as a child who's exploring and just wants to be a kid and soaking up every new experience. It was a really positive time in the park where I got to do art and learned about nature. And I guess that sort of stood with me a little bit. And then when I was an adult, facing a very stressful time studying for the California bar, it was again a return to nature that provided a little bit of respite and solace and an ability to just reframe myself, refresh, and then get back to the work at hand. Now that I'm older, I do find opportunities, whether it's playing tennis or doing some swimming or running, that those are important things. So it's just a reminder that parks serve a variety of people. We serve kids, we serve adults, and we serve our aging population. I'm not putting myself in the aging population yet, but soon there. And that's how I think that things show up. I think that experience probably in Will Rogers YMCA camp was really important to me because I was able to be in nature, touch nature, and I guess I took nature home with me. I don't know if you're supposed to do that, but I took white acorns home with me. Sorry, Mom.
Well, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. When you were explaining your story, one of the things that I was considering was somebody had to plan that, right? Try to integrate it decades before you were ever able to experience that. So your successors tried to do good public service, and we are trying to promote that here as well. I want to be sensitive to your schedule. We know you have a lot going on, AP. We really thank you for joining us today. And I'm sure you'd tell everybody, go ahead and visit Los Angeles, have a good time, go ahead and visit Seattle and enjoy those facilities. But is there anything else you wanted to add as we wrap today that we didn't cover?
I would just say, if you're listening to this and you love public spaces, you love parks, you love your city, get involved, get to know the things and be part of the solutions. Dream the big ideas, come work in public service, and whatever your love language is, identify it and know it and do it. Do life together with other people. That's what makes life exciting. And you can do that in public parks and in public spaces. There's a variety of ways to get involved. I'm also happy to talk to anybody. If you want to reach out on LinkedIn, I'm happy to be a thought partner, an ear, an inspirer, a motivator, or also just connect with people. So thank you so much, Shane, for having me and letting me tell a little bit of my story and what I'm doing. And I hope it inspires someone. I hope it makes someone understand just what I was saying about the power of parks and that we need to advocate for them as essential infrastructure because it's the health and wellness of our cities.
Well, that's great. And we'll leave our audience with that. We thank you so much for taking time today to be on this episode of the Public Works Podcast. Thank you, AP Diaz, Director of Parks and Recreation for the City of Seattle. And it's had a great career that we learned about today. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for your inspirational thoughts and comments. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, take care. That was my conversation with AP Diaz, Superintendent of Parks and Recreation for the City of Seattle. AP is a true public servant whose career reminds us that great communities are built not just with concrete and steel, but with engagement, creativity, and care. From his time leading initiatives in Los Angeles to his current work in Seattle, AP has demonstrated how public spaces can bring people together, improve lives, and strengthen the civic fabric that connects us all. We also appreciate AP's efforts outside of the workplace through volunteering and educating the next generation. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow the Public Works Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a quick rating or review. That helps more people discover the show as we try to highlight the stories of people who keep our communities connected and moving forward. You can also find us on social media platforms like YouTube and LinkedIn at the Public Works Podcast. Finally, to learn more about our guests and upcoming episodes or to review episodes previously recorded, please visit www.thepublicworkspodcast.com. I'm Shane Silsby, and until next time, thanks for listening, and remember, every great community continues to thrive primarily because of efforts of people who care, especially those in public service. Thank you very much.